Wow. Thank you, Jacob. Boy, are we lucky to have you. Good morning and welcome to All Souls Church. My name is Linda Cozzens and I'm this week's service assistant. We begin with a few practical pieces of welcome to this service over Zoom. First, we ask that you stay muted to help reduce background noise unless you're actively speaking with everyone, such as during our sharing of joys and concerns. You can mute or unmute in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you're on a phone, you can mute or unmute by pressing *6. If you are using a personal computer, you can unmute by holding down your space bar while you speak. And if you're new to All Souls Church, please take a moment and click the link in the order of service and the chat for our connection card so we can stay in touch. During the service, please feel free to get up, move around, or take a break from the service as you need, but try to be as present as possible and imagine we are all in the same room together. We're recording the service, so if you don't want to have your face on the recording, now's the time to turn off your video. Welcome to this morning, this day, this opportunity to be together in community, which is a time of joy, comfort, and sometimes challenges. The Unitarian Universalist congregation is a place where we come to learn more about being human. We're not here because we figured out life's questions or because we think we've got it right. We come here to learn more about being in relationship together, how to listen, how to forgive, how to be vulnerable, and how to create trust and compassion in one another. Let us move into our service willing to be authentic with each other, honest within ourselves, and opening to connection in all of its forms. We covenant to create a caring, affirming, and inclusive community that invites us to become our best selves.
We light this chalice with the words from the first two principles of our UUA denomination. We covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And we follow the All Souls tradition of lighting our earth candle, symbolic of our commitment to being a green sanctuary congregation. May both these flames call us to kinship with and great care for the earth and our living creatures. I invite you to join with us now as we center our hearts and sing our chalice song, Rise Up, O Flame.
Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy.
For our opening words, I read Break Down Barriers by Ree Williams. Spirit of life, come to us to break down barriers, to widen horizons, to make us less judgmental, to help us see a larger picture and a kinder conclusion, to love and let live, to embrace and forgive, to sustain and care. Help us to reach out to our better selves that we may love more and hate less, care more and reject less, that bound together by understanding we may sustain each other through trial and tribulation, through joy and happiness, through sickness and health. Help us, O God, to be joined in a common purpose of hope and fulfillment. Renew and revive us. We seek a common holy ground for one and all. Amen. Our opening hymn is Let Justice Roll Down.
Morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. And I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
There is no freedom, the wise man said, let justice roll down when the poor cry out for shelter and bread. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Hatred will never drive out hate. Let love roll down, roll down. Remember, our hearts can make us great. Let love roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let your love roll down like a mighty stream. When brutality threatens our daughters and sons, let peace roll down, roll down. May our voices rise up louder than the guns. Let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Step by step, one by one, let justice roll down, roll down. They can kill the prophet, but the dream lives on. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream.
I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
As a spiritual community, we journey together through life's ups and downs and hold each other in love. We take this time to reflect on our week, to recall the milestones, the joys, the concerns, the sorrows, the changes in our lives, and those in need of healing. If you have a heartfelt milestone, what happened? Hold on, sorry. Sorry. If you have a heartfelt milestone, joy, or sorrow you'd like to share, you're invited to share aloud or in the chat. If you'd like to share, you can come off mute, again, by pressing the unmute in the lower left corner of your screen, or pressing *6 if you're calling in. Please share your name and briefly express what's on your heart. If you are having trouble unmuting, give us a wave and we'll try to unmute you from this end. Well, Alicia will. After each person shares, we will drop a stone in water symbolic of the water gathered and blessed in this year's water ceremony. Please know that this section won't end up in the final recording. What's shared now is kept only here in real time, and all are welcome to share now. Well, for all the sorrows and all the joys spoken aloud and held quietly in our hearts, we'll drop one final stone.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell a story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
I invite you to join in a time of meditation and prayer, first in words, then in silence, then in melody. Our words of meditation today are from W.B. Du Bois. The prayer of our souls is a petition for persistence, not for the one good deed or single thought, but deed on deed and thought on thought, until day calling into day shall make a life worth living. Let us be together in shared silence.
A religious community is like a river formed from the many streams of our lives that meet and merge and flow to the sea. As members of this religious community, we share our time and energy, our creativity, imagination, and vision, our talents, skills, and gifts, and the streams of our individual lives to create a river that is both deep and broad, a river that is made of many streams, sustains life, and refreshes the land through which it flows. But the river of this community also depends on our shared financial support that makes real our shared values and vision. We will now receive an offering for the support of this religious community and its work in the wider world. You can give online at the link in the order of service or in the chat, or you can have a meditative moment of writing out a check later today and mailing it to the church. You are invited to give generously and joyfully as you are willing and able. Thank you for your generosity. You may make your offering during George's reading, which we will have in lieu of music today.
A reading is from The Story of Whiteness, excerpts from Sarah C. Stewart. Whiteness has been used throughout the histories of America and Europe to praise desirable groups of people and exclude undesirable groups. But whiteness is not an ethnic group, a cultural group, or a nationality. In the United States, the Supreme Court legally defined what is meant to be white in a pair of decisions in 1922. In other words, whiteness was created by law to let some people in and keep others out. Soon after becoming a nation, the United States passed a law that only free white immigrants could become citizens. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution expanded citizenship to anyone born in the United States, including African Americans. But immigrants seeking naturalized citizenship still had to prove they were white, and the courts soon found themselves in the position having to decide who was white. America is once again facing pressure for people to align along racial lines. We do not need to do that. Resist other people's categories. Share your values in conversation, in protest, in petition, in assembly. We are all kin. We do better when we work together. We need all of us in all our diversity to build the world we dream of. Ross will now present his reflections on race.
Good morning. What I would like to do this morning is discuss two topics that have received recent attention in the discussion of racism in the United States. Critical race theory is one. The other is the concept of white fragility, which became well publicized in Robin DiAngelo's 2018 bestseller of that title. May I ask, can everyone hear me all right? Okay, I assume you can. Let's start with critical race theory. This term has been used as a political hot potato in recent years. An important aspect of CRT, and I will use CRT as short for critical race theory, an important aspect of CRT is how it is used as a basis to argue for traditional rather than radical history to be taught in schools. Critics of CRT say that it must not be taught, that it will undermine the teaching of American history by stirring up unpatriotic ideas, and that CRT labels the United States as a racist country with a racist history. However, CRT is a term that is often tossed about without clarifying what it is. So what is critical race theory? Critical race theory is a philosophical movement. It is a scholarly intellectual framework for viewing race in society. As I've just said, it is a term that has caused confusion. Part of the reason is that different proponents of CRT disagree about which ideas are a part of CRT. For simplicity, I will quote from the Britannica website outline of the tenets of CRT. These tenets include the following claims, which are summarized on the slide that I'm now going to share with you. Bear with me as I get it.
You're all set, Ross. It's already up.
Okay, thank you. Number one, race is socially constructed, not biologically natural. Number two, racism in the United States has become normalized. It is not aberrational. It is the common, ordinary experience of most people of color. The third tenet, legal advances for people of color tend to be bent to serve the interests of dominant white groups. The racial hierarchy that characterizes American society may be unaffected or even reinforced by ostensible improvements in the legal status of oppressed or exploited people. An example might be affirmative action. Initially created to advance people of color, it has also been used to stimulate opposition to such advances. The point is that it is not enough to pass good laws or elect good people, but that the law or official needs to be supported and called to account when necessary. The fourth tenet is that members of minority groups periodically undergo differential racialization, or to say it in another way, they are assigned to them negative stereotypes depending on the needs or interests of the dominant white group. Tenet number 5, no individual can be adequately identified by membership in a single group. An African American person, for example, may also identify as a woman, a lesbian, a feminist, a Unitarian Universalist, and so on. In other words, we must not oversimplify the minority groups that are being discussed. We must consider the complicated interactions that exist among these different identities. And finally, tenet number 6 of CRT, people of color are uniquely qualified to speak on behalf of other members of their group regarding the forms and effects of racism. This legal storytelling movement argues that the views of victims of racism provide unique insight into the nature of the legal system. I think that is useful, but we mustn't let it interfere with cooperation among groups of different demographic composition. Groups that are predominantly white, such as us Unitarian Universalists, should still be able to work together with groups with predominantly minority members. So in summary, then, these 6 points we're not necessarily we agree with them or that everyone agrees with it by any means, but these are 6 of the main tenets of critical race theory. Let us clarify the distinction between critical race theory and the racial history of our country. They are not the same thing. They overlap but are distinctly different. CRT is used to examine our country's history, to identify racist elements in our culture, and it seeks to find ways to eliminate that racism. The history of race and of racial incidents in our country is just that, history. How much of that history we should teach our young people and how to interpret that history are being heatedly discussed now. Certainly, CRT can inform teachers how they might present that racial history, but it is not the same as teaching CRT. On the other hand, one could teach CRT, that is, teach the principles I have just outlined. In fact, it might be good to explicitly state these principles to put the spotlight on the tools being used to analyze our racial history by advocates of critical race theory. Let me finish discussing CRT by citing an example of the controversy over CRT. In June of this year, the Florida Department of Education voted to restrict what public school children can be taught about the past. Teachers may not define U.S. history, quote, as something other than the creation of a new nation based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence, end of quote. One concept in particular was singled out for prohibition, critical race theory. In other words, Florida is suppressing discussion of the negative aspects of American racial history. What better way to preserve systemic racism than to forbid talking about it? In short, I don't know that CRT appears in any textbook, But George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and the Roosevelts do appear in textbooks. Should they be portrayed as heroes or as humans? Should history be taught to instill patriotism and homage for the way things are, or to be studied to learn from our past? The other main topic I want to discuss today are concepts in the book White Fragility. Robin DiAngelo introduced the term white fragility in a paper in 2014. Her book by that title was published in 2018, became a bestseller. It is interesting to note that the publisher was the Beacon Press, the UUA's publishing entity. The term represents subtle racist attitudes held by many white people, most white people according to DiAngelo, and in particular describes the uneasiness and resentment expressed by many white people when the topic of racism is discussed. Here are a couple of examples from Robin DiAngelo's corporate workshops on racism. The white male who pounds on the table saying that blacks are getting all the jobs. Of the 35 people in the room, only one is a person of color. Another example, the white woman who interrupts a black woman's comments. When the black woman objects, the white woman says, "That's just my personality. You know I am a talker." When DiAngelo intervenes to point out the racial undertones of a white person dominating a person of color in public, the white woman responds, "Are you accusing me of being racist? That's ridiculous. I'll just shut up." Shortly thereafter, she leaves the room. These examples show some of the typical responses characteristic of racial fragility, which I've outlined on this slide. These responses include denying racism and justifying their comments as other than racist, becoming angry and resentful, climbing up or otherwise disengaging from the conversation, or leaving the discussion. Jonathan Church summarizes DiAngelo's basic idea as follows. White people have been socialized to live with a deeply internalized sense of superiority and entitlement, but they are not consciously aware of it, the concept of white privilege. As a result, they experience race-based stress when faced with the challenge to their race-based worldview because they perceive that challenge as an affront to their identities as good moral people and an attack on their rightful place in the hierarchy. You may end the slide, thank you. Perhaps the most central and important concept in the white fragility view is that virtually all white people have implicit racial bias. DiAngelo believes that this implicit bias towards people of color is a main factor that sustains and preserves the systemic racism in our culture. Furthermore, this implicit bias cannot be erased. The only thing you can do about it is to constantly look inward to try to suppress this bias and constantly be working to prevent unconscious negative actions that offend people of color. I'm outlining these topics that are on this slide. In fact, others have made the analogy between this idea of implicit bias and the concept of original sin in Christian theology. There is nothing you can do to erase it. You must constantly work to overcome it. And until we all do this, implicit racial bias will continue to sustain the systemic racism in our society. So let's just quickly go over those points again that are the role of implicit racial bias. Most people have subconscious racial bias. They are not aware of it. It is subconscious. The bias sustains and preserves the systemic racism in our culture. The implicit bias cannot be erased. We can only deal with it by trying to constantly confront it and prevent it from being expressed as racist comments and actions. And the only way to neutralize systemic racism in the view of white fragility is for enough of us to neutralize the expression of our implicit bias. You can share the slides. Thank you. Several writers have criticized this idea. They suggest that the idea actually contributes to racial divides rather than heals them, and they suggest that there are better ways to fight racism and purge structural racism from our society. John Mcwhorter, a Black professor of linguistics at Columbia University, is, in my opinion, the best spokesperson for this view. He thinks that D'Angelo's solution is to fix white people's souls, when in reality, he believes the place that people should look at is institutions, the rules for police, the rules for fair housing, and so on. His two major criticisms then can be restated as follows. Number one, D'Angelo's belief that white implicit racism must constantly be addressed to overcome systemic racism is not the answer. Rather, one must directly act to correct the problems within institutions. And Mcwhorter's second point, D'Angelo dehumanizes Black people by regarding them as overly sensitive and weak, which actually reinforces racism rather than combats it. To quote Mcwhorter, I see no connection between D'Angelo's brand of re-education and vigorous constructive activism on issues important to the Black community. In other words, Mcwhorter thinks that implicit bias is not the main factor, but rather rules, laws, and practices are what perpetuates racism. We must not let the inward search for implicit bias get in the way of directly changing racist practices. In closing, I think that critical race theory and the ideas of white fragility help us to get a better view of the sources of racism in our society. Yes, we must confront and recognize our own implicit biases, and we should seriously listen to the voices of oppressed minorities. We just need to remember that in the end, our goal is to directly fight racism, to reduce it as much as humanly possible, and to help create a more equitable society. May it be so. Thank you.
You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do. Oh Lord, you gotta do when the Spirit says do. 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 You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you gotta sing. Oh Lord, you gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. 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 You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you gotta dance. Oh Lord, you gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 You gotta laugh when the Spirit says laugh. You gotta laugh when the Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, you gotta laugh, oh Lord. You gotta laugh when the Spirit says laugh. 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 You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. When the Spirit says shout, you gotta shout, oh Lord. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. 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 You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do. Oh Lord, you gotta do when the Spirit says do. Spirit says do. Spirit says do. Spirit says do.
Our closing words, the words of Theodore Parker, Unitarian Universalist minister, made in 1853, rephrased by Martin Luther King Jr. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Change takes a long time, but it does happen. Thank you.
So there's a couple of announcements before we leave. Monday at 11/8 at 3:30 is a connection circle called a midday meetup. Also on Monday at 6:30 p.m. is a Board of Trustees meeting. Good thing to let me know. Tuesday on the 9th, 7:15 is Social Action Environment Committee meeting. Next Friday, the 12th at 10 a.m., there's a connection circle, which will be a coffee hour. And next Sunday, regular service via Zoom is Reverend Beau Rivers, and it's entitled Moral Injury. And Monday, 11:15 is Dickens pie baking at the church. So thank you, everybody.
I'd like to add one extra thing in there, that the choir had a practice this morning, and we're going to have an in-person choir practice this Thursday at 1 o'clock in the sanctuary for anyone who's musically inclined, wants to join in.
Okay.
And I would also like to let people know that that the South Shore Arts Center in Cohasset will be having an art installation on the themes basically that we talked about today, starting this Friday and going through December 18th. The write-up about it is in today's Boston Globe, and it sounds like they've done a really nice job addressing these themes. So I think it's probably, if you haven't been there, it's something worthwhile to go to.
One more addition, I think your orders of service have a lot of rundowns of things going on with Dickens. And one thing that was not mentioned but should be lifted up today is that we are putting together a celebration on December 18th, which is a Saturday, online. And we are looking for people who would like to share their holiday talents, but maybe cooking video or holiday craft, or maybe you'd like to read a story. Those kinds of things. So Sandra Lingley is coordinating that. So put your thinking caps on. I'm sure that a lot of you have things maybe hidden or not so hidden that might lend itself to this celebration. And we have Father Christmas is coming back in the same form that we have seen him in prior years. So That's great.
All right, so it looks like with that, our service is concluded. I look forward to seeing you all next week. You can stay on for coffee hour if you'd like, but you are more than welcome to sign off now if you have other things to attend to. Thank you, everybody, for a great service today. Awesome job, committee.